January 23rd, 1943. A Siberian morning in the ruins of Stalingrad. Snowdrifts swirl through shattered hospital corridors, biting into the faces of weary nurses wrapped in thin Red Cross coats. Lying on cots, German and Russian wounded groan as outside, artillery hammers the city's shell of frozen bricks. Sister Edith Hasse places her trembling hands on a young soldier's brow, whispering comfort just before a shell rattles the window panes. Death was everywhere, but so was hope, pressed between blood-soaked bandages and frostbitten fingers. What Edith cannot know is that within days, her uniformed devotion will mean not salvation, but captivity. By February's end, Stalingrad's defenders, soldiers, medics, and hundreds of women nurses surrender and vanish into the endless steppes. The crisis, a city of shadows. The battle for Stalingrad turns hospitals into graveyards. More than 800,000 German lives lost, 1.1 million Russian casualties. Under constant fire, medical supplies dwindle. Bureaucracy and chaos leave nurses without enough morphine, clean water, or bandages. Red Cross nurses are posted everywhere, from converted department stores to makeshift tent wards on the snowy outskirts. Their roles blur. They become surgeons, sanitation workers, comforters, and often witnesses to the impossible. Each day brought new horrors. The dead, the dying, the missing, recalls an anonymous nurse in her diary. Among the ruins, belief in rescue fades. A few dozen nurses, overwhelmed and surrounded, cling to duty that seems both sacred and doomed. The mavericks, young, unyielding, and alone. Most are barely 20 years old. Edith, Ermela, Ingeborg, volunteers drawn east from cities like Berlin and Leipzig, driven by national fervor or family legacy, trained by the German Red Cross, denied aspirations beyond nursing by war and Nazi law. Some are fiercely loyal to the Reich, others simply desperate to help. Many face soul-crushing dilemmas, whether to treat enemies, to stand aside as wounded are abandoned, or to obey orders in the face of moral conflict. War makes you old in a week, Edith later writes, but duty kept our hearts beating. The revelation, sudden captivity. As the German lines collapse, nurses huddle together, clutching medical kits and hastily packed bundles. Their world is upended. Soviet troops advance through ruined wards, both rescuers and captors. Orders are barked, papers torn. The nurses are interrogated, catalogued, moved from makeshift hospitals to POW convoys. For Edith, the revelation is bitter. The Red Cross means mercy, but in Stalingrad, it means survival, barely. One young nurse sketches her last moments of freedom inside the ward, a faded compass lying on her lap, as she wonders, do we serve mankind or only our nation's memory? The resistance, fear, solidarity, survival. Soviet captors are both compassionate and skeptical. Rumors spread, German nurses aided wounded regardless of uniform. Others accuse they are accomplices to the invaders. Within POW camps, nurses band together. Some face ridicule and violence, others find unlikely allies among Russian doctors. Resistance is often quiet, a stolen blanket shared, a whispered word in Russian, a prayer in the dark. In rare recorded dialogue, "You are the enemy, not a healer," one Soviet nurse accuses. "Not today, not with a wounded child before us," answers Edith. Bureaucracy threatens their existence. Letters are censored or never sent. Orders are vague. Survival is uncertain. Yet solidarity and moral courage flicker on. The first test, POW camps and medical duty. Days turn into months in POW barracks outside the city. Nurses are conscripted, often forcibly, to tend both German and Russian wounded. Resources remain scarce. Rations dwindle. Each day they must navigate suspicion and hope. Report from Soviet officer, German women worked well, but always eyes far away, always watching the road home. A nurse documents statistics in her diary. 26 wounds treated, 3 lives saved, 1 funeral today. In the cold, relief and disbelief mingle. The essence of nursing remains, compassion, even among enemies. Winter grinds on in the steppes outside Stalingrad. The nurses shiver as endless rows of wounded fill the makeshift barracks, their Red Cross patches soiled by blood and mud. Nights are spent staving off despair, whispered prayers, secret sharing of scraps, fleeting moments of hope as the wind howls and guards stomp outside. We learned to listen for the sound of boots, Edith recalls. Sometimes it meant another wounded, sometimes it meant news, sometimes it meant a friend would disappear into the snow. Records show German Red Cross nurses were both a lifeline and a symbol, holding together fragments of the front with bandages and willpower. Thousands served, but in these places, each nurse was often alone, responsible for entire wards. Many buried the dead themselves, sometimes offering the same respect to Russian casualties out of moral conviction. Camaraderie deepens among prisoners. Edith and Ermela, once strangers, form a quiet alliance, trading skills and comfort. Nurses teach each other Russian phrases, patch uniforms, and share stories of home. Some face moments of humanity. A Russian doctor, grateful for help, slips extra rations. Others endure interrogation, suspicion, or brutal cold. "You're a nurse before you're a German," says one nurse quietly in the logbook, as she chooses to comfort a Soviet conscript dying beside a German. Yet the trauma is enormous. Diaries tell of unbearable choices: triage under fire, refusing orders to abandon enemy wounded, the agony of memory when faces fade into an endless list. The Red Cross training meant little against real war, but it gave these women a code: mercy over malice, healing over hate. Some nurses plot escape, others dream only of surviving until spring. One diary fragment: "Tomorrow is another day, maybe freedom, maybe just frost." Survival depends not just on skill, but on adaptation. German nurses negotiate with Soviet overseers, bartering for warmth or food with medical supplies. When typhus breaks out, nurses administer care, sometimes risking their own lives for enemies and friends alike. A Soviet officer observes, "They heal as if every wounded man is their brother, no matter his coat." Days and nights blend together. Edith, in her faded uniform, stares out at the endless white. Years later she will write, "Captivity made us redefine duty. We became mothers, sisters, enemies, and healers at once." Small acts of rebellion persist, hiding extra food for the sick, scribbling silent poems in Russian and German, maintaining dignity in a place built to erase it. Hope was a luxury. Compassion was our only defiance. Time passes. The war ends. But for many nurses, captivity stretches on, years in remote camps, far from the world that remembers victory or defeat. Letters home go unsent. Medals gather dust, memory itself becomes the final battlefield. Years pass, the world outside moves on, but for the nurses lost in captivity, time grinds ever slower. After Stalingrad, the trail of Edith and her fellow nurses leads deep into Soviet territory. The camps now hold thousands: military nurses, helpers, and civilians swept up in the collapse of the Reich. Some, like Sister Hildegard, work 16-hour days under Soviet watch, cleaning hospital wards repurposed for wounded Red Army men. Others are forced to work in mines, forests, or rail yards, their bodies pressed by frost and labor. Some remember being marched through streets, jeered at, spat on for the uniforms they once wore. Spoken in the language of trauma, we were nurses, not soldiers, but that did not matter. Hunger bites deep. In Karelia, more than 200 women perish in 1 year from cold and malnutrition. In the Caucasus, half the camp's population is lost to disease and exhaustion. Even those paid for their labor can barely afford bread, 1 day's work for a single loaf if they are lucky. Norms are strict. Work quotas are higher for women than for men. Injury means hunger. Illness is often a death sentence. One nurse writes, "The sick fall silent, the healthy haul wood." In grim moments, bonds form that defy power and time. Edith finds herself allied with a Russian Jewish doctor, both women exiles in a machine built on suffering. Survival for many hangs on these alliances, these threads of mercy amid brutality. Letters are rare, one card home in 3 years, enough to say only, "I am alive." Some are never sent, some are never answered. Camps change, commands change, and throughout, hope is always just a rumor. Most nurses are returned between 1947 and 1949. By then, their faces are aged before their time. Those released are met not with celebration but with blank stares and bureaucratic silence. Some bring children, young, speaking only Russian, staring in confusion at a world they barely remember. A West German pastor writes, "They arrive in cheerless dark clothing, haunted by hunger and years of silence. They look like exhausted beasts of burden, marked by exile." A last group of 400 arrives in 1955, almost forgotten, their fate barely noted. Some never return at all. Their stories scatter to the wind, lost among the ruins and files of a world that wanted to forget. Even in freedom, wounds linger. Nurses are often denied recognition, their memories locked in secrecy or shame. Some rebuild lives, some disappear into the crowds. Edith publishes a memoir, others do not speak. We were not heroes. We were not traitors. We were simply the hands that remained when everyone else was gone. Years after liberation, silence drapes the story of Stalingrad's nurses. Edith sits at her desk, looking at the faded portrait in her Red Cross certificate, young, determined, fearful, and alone. In post-war Germany, the return of women POWs is barely noticed. The press runs small headlines. Politicians speak of reconstruction, rarely of those who suffered far beyond the front. Nurses are greeted quietly. Some neighbors whisper, some merely nod. Too many carry their own unspoken grief. Red Cross sisterhoods attempt reunions. Some women, like Ermela, gather in small chapels or community halls. Together they light candles and read from battered journals, stories of loss and healing, in the hope that shared memory can soothe what time cannot. Outside, children play among ruins, oblivious to the history in their midst. "You survived," an old comrade says. "Does that make you brave or just lucky?" Edith rereads letters she wrote in captivity. Some describe days of hope, others only numbers. 3 deaths, 6 wounds, 2 sunsets. The words seem almost stranger now, the gap between who she was and who the world expects. The memoirs of German Red Cross nurses begin to appear decades later, first anonymously, then in small print runs, and finally as part of the larger reckoning with Germany's war guilt and women's roles. Historians seek out sisters whose memories offer a window into not just suffering, but the complexity of ethics under extreme duress. Nurse meetings become spaces for reflection, sharing not only trauma, but the small acts of kindness and humanity that persisted. Many speak quietly of Soviet colleagues who risked censure to help them, or the cross-cultural friendships born in adversity. A nurse addresses her fellows. "We cared for the fallen, German, Russian, all. We obeyed what mercy demanded, not what war decreed." For others, memory is a burden. Some hardly speak of Stalingrad. They let their medals tarnish and pack their diaries away, hoping quiet will bring peace. But the silence itself becomes a kind of testimony, a monument to what cannot ever be fully confessed or judged. From these stories, a new history emerges, one less about heroics and more about ordinary courage, remorse, and the fragile persistence of compassion. The last words of Edith's memoir read, "My hands healed wounds, buried the dead, and held hope through darkness. Not for a flag nor a nation, but for anyone who needed the light." Decades fade, but remembrance finds new voices. University researchers, archivists, and families begin to gather fragments. Faded photos, tattered diaries, letters kept for decades, sometimes hidden out of shame or sorrow. The memoirs of nurses who served at Stalingrad return to public light, stories of mercy, ambiguity, and survival that challenge old ideas of heroism and guilt. The German Red Cross memorializes its wartime sisters at quiet ceremonies, names etched into marble, their service finally spoken aloud. In small towns, reunions allow former nurses to meet at last, exchanging silent embraces and recalling the bonds forged in the city's ruins. Sisterhood, once a promise among adolescent girls, becomes a lasting community for elderly women. They remember not just the pain, but the small blessings. A Russian nurse sharing bread across a barbed wire fence, a Soviet doctor risking censure to spare a German child. In the service of the wounded, the boundaries of enemy and ally blurred. Memory, gentle but unflinching, shapes the future. A historian's voice closing the story. Compassion is the final resistance to war. The nurses of Stalingrad remind us that beyond uniforms and commands, humanity survives in kindness, in healing, and in the refusal to forget. A candle glows in a chapel, held by wrinkled hands. Children run outside, the snow falling softly, the scars of war now deep in the earth. Edith's final lines echo. "We did not fight with guns, nor hide from suffering. We stood beside the lost, buried the forgotten, and claimed hope from darkness. May history bear witness, not only to death, but to the mercy that outlasts it." So ends the story of forgotten nurses, remembered by those who needed them most, and by those who choose now to listen.